The diner was quiet, until two officers stormed in and made everyone stare. A black man in a worn army jacket sat alone in the corner, sipping coffee he had paid for with loose change. He wasn't loud. He wasn't bothering anyone. But to them he didn't belong. Loitering, they said. Trespassing, they added. They didn't ask questions. They told him to get up. He stood slowly, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. One officer grabbed his duffel bag, dumped it out right there. Boots, medals, and a folded American flag scattered across the floor like trash. A silver star hit the linoleum with a loud clink. The younger cop kicked it aside with his boot. Diners watched, but no one moved. One child asked why they were arresting a soldier. His mother shushed him. The man stayed calm, only said one thing. "I'd like to make a phone call." The officers laughed, handed him a phone like it was a joke. 7 minutes later, their radios crackled. A voice they recognized ordered them to stand down. They froze, because what no one in that diner knew was that the man they'd just humiliated had once saved the governor's son in Afghanistan. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. The sun had barely risen over the small town of Leeville, South Carolina. Morning fog still clung to the sidewalks, and the only place open was May's Diner, an old roadside stop with cracked linoleum floors, chipped coffee mugs, and the smell of bacon grease soaked into the walls. Inside, the regulars were already there, truckers with mud on their boots, retired factory men with folded newspapers, a waitress named Carla, who moved with the slow rhythm of someone who'd worked too many double shifts, and in the back booth, always the back booth, sat James. He came in most mornings just after opening, carried a green army duffel that had clearly seen combat zones and rainstorms. His jacket, frayed at the cuffs, bore faded patches and a single name stitched above the chest, J. Turner. He never ordered more than a coffee, sometimes toast if he had enough coins. He never asked for anything more, and he always left a tip, even if it was only a nickel. Carla didn't mind him. Said he was quiet as a shadow. He'd pick up trash outside, wipe his table clean, and disappear before the lunch crowd rolled in. But not everyone liked him there. Earl, a retired officer who sat near the front window, called him one. Those types. Said he made the place look bad. Veteran or not, there's shelters for people like him. No one argued, not out loud. James never reacted. He would sit for an hour, sip his coffee slowly, and stare out the window like he was watching a world that no longer recognized him. Nobody in Leeville really knew James Turner, only what they assumed, that he had served, that he came back broken, that the system let him fall. Then came the call. It was around 7:42 a.m. Carla heard it first, crackling over the police scanner someone kept behind the counter. Suspicious. Individual loitering at May's Diner, requesting units to check it out. She looked up, confused, then looked back at James, quietly reading a newspaper he'd found on the empty seat beside him. Outside, headlights turned into the lot. A squad car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, Darnell and Haskins. Everyone in town knew them. Young, white, just a few years out of the academy. They were known more for their attitude than their training. Darnell, the taller one, wore mirrored sunglasses even inside. Haskins, always chewing gum, laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. They didn't like questions. They liked control, and James, sitting there peacefully with nothing but coffee and old medals in his bag, was about to become their target. No one in that diner stood up to stop them. Not Earl, not Carla, not the man with the crossword puzzle or the woman pouring syrup on pancakes for her son, because in towns like Leeville, silence always came first, especially when a black man was the one being questioned. And on that morning, silence would cost more than anyone expected. The door swung open with a loud jingle that broke the stillness of the diner. Officers Darnell and Haskins stepped inside like they owned the place. Their boots echoed on the faded tile as they walked. Past the booth, scanning faces already smirking. "Morning, folks," Darnell called out loud and casual. "Heard we got ourselves a situation." Haskins laughed behind him, eyes locked on James Turner, still seated in his corner booth, still holding his mug with two steady hands. No one said anything. Carla looked down and wiped an already clean counter. A man by the window shifted in his seat. The woman with the young boy pulled him closer, away from the aisle. Darnell walked right up to James's booth. "You got ID?" he asked. James looked up slowly, calm, still. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, worn wallet. Inside was a folded veteran's card, creased at the corners, and an old South Carolina license, barely legible from age. Haskins snatched it. "Says you're a vet," he said, glancing at the ID. "That mean you get to sit around diners all day?" James didn't answer. He looked at his coffee and took a slow sip. "We got a call," Darnell continued. "Someone said you were making customers uncomfortable, loitering, harassing staff. You been doing that?" James shook his head once. "No. Mind if we take a look in the bag?" Haskins asked, though it didn't sound like a question. James didn't resist. He pushed the duffel forward. Haskins unzipped it and dumped it onto the floor in front of everyone. Silence dropped over the diner like a thick blanket. Out spilled everything. A pair of old boots, a crumpled sweatshirt, a tightly folded flag in a triangle case, a photo of two soldiers in uniform standing in front of a chopper, and a small wooden box holding military medals, 2 bronze stars, 1 silver star, and a purple heart. Haskins stepped over them like they were debris. "Well, look at that," he muttered. "You play soldier in your spare time?" James blinked. "Nothing more." Carla started to speak. "That's enough." But Darnell raised a hand toward her and said, "Stay out of it, ma'am. This is official business." Someone in the back of the diner laughed. Someone else got up and left. Haskins picked up the photo. "That you?" he asked. "Or just something you found in a trash can?" Still no response. Darnell grew irritated. "You're not helping yourself, sir," he said, stressing the word sir like a joke. "You're not buying anything. You've been here too long. That's trespassing." "I bought coffee," James said quietly. "You bought time," Haskins snapped. "And it's up." Darnell reached for his cuffs. "You're under suspicion of trespassing and loitering. Let's go." James looked down at his spilled medals. One had rolled under the table. "Before you do," he said, his voice calm, "I'd like to make one phone call." Haskins rolled his eyes and pulled a department-issued phone from his belt. "Sure, make it quick." James took the phone, dialed slowly. 8 digits, pause, then 2 more. He held it to his ear and said only 3 words. "It's James now." He handed the phone back. Darnell chuckled. "That your lawyer?" James didn't answer. The 2 officers turned toward the counter, chuckling to each other. One muttered, "Something about people pulling the race card." Another officer on the scanner could be heard asking for backup, just in case. But before another word could be said, the diner's landline rang. The ring was loud, too loud. Carla hesitated, then picked it up. Her expression changed in slow motion. First confusion, then recognition, then fear. She held the phone out to Darnell. "It's for you." He frowned, took the phone. "This is Officer Darnell." His face paled. The smugness slid off like wet paint. "Yes, sir," he said quickly. "Yes, he's right here. We didn't—" "No, sir, of course. We'll stand down immediately." He hung up and stood frozen. Haskins asked, "Who was it?" Before Darnell could answer, both of their radios crackled. Loud and sharp. "All units, Officers Darnell and Haskins, stand down immediately. Do not detain. Leave the premises at once. This is a direct order from the office of the governor. Repeat. Stand down." Everyone in the diner stopped. The waitress with the coffee pot gasped. The man with the crossword looked up. The mother stared, straight ahead, unmoving. James knelt down slowly, picked up each of his medals, folded the flag with practiced hands, placed everything back in his bag. He didn't look at the officers. Darnell stepped back like the floor might break beneath him. Haskins no longer looked so sure of himself. They turned and walked out without saying a word. No apology, no explanation. Just the sound of their boots leaving the diner. James returned to his seat, took one final sip of cold coffee. The silence that followed was louder than anything the officers had said, because now the room was full of people who realized they had just watched a decorated veteran be humiliated in front of them, and none of them had done a thing. The air inside the diner turned heavy, like the kind before a thunderstorm, thick with things unsaid. The two officers hadn't made it 10 feet out the door before conversations started again, but this time in hushed tones. Not one eye left James. He remained seated, the coffee now cold in his mug, his bag zipped shut, medals carefully placed. Inside, though the weight of what had just happened still sat on the table with him, but it wasn't over. The door opened again. Darnell and Haskins reappeared, faces tight, voices low but sharp. "Come on," Darnell barked. "Up!" James looked at them, slow and still. "You got your phone call. Doesn't mean you get to stay here all day." James didn't speak. He stood up quietly, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Let's go," Haskins snapped, grabbing the strap. The bag dropped, hit the floor with a thud. The force knocked open the zipper again, and one of the medals, a silver star, rolled out. It spun on the tile floor before coming to a stop near the feet of the boy sitting with his mother. The boy leaned forward, picked it up, and looked at A. In closely. "Mom," he whispered, "this is a soldier medal." She took it from him, eyes wide. "Put it down," she said quickly, as though it burned her hands. Across the room, James bent to pick up the rest of his things. His body moved slowly, like it had remembered too many wounds. He picked up a boot, a photo, the folded flag. As he reached for the medal near the boy's table, Haskins stepped in and kicked it across the floor again. It slid under the counter. Carla gasped. "Hey, what the hell is wrong with you?" "Back off," Darnell said without turning. "We're handling it." James stood up, looked down at the space where the medal had landed. His hands didn't shake, his voice didn't rise. "I served with men who didn't come home," he said quietly. "That medal is not for decoration." Darnell ignored him. "You're trespassing. That's still a crime." Carla moved around the counter, trembling now. "You need to stop," she said. "He's done nothing. You're not even supposed to be here." "I said step back, ma'am," Haskins repeated, jaw tight. That's when the radio crackled again. "Officers Darnell and Haskins, this is dispatch. Be advised. Repeat, stand down. Leave the premises immediately. Orders confirmed from executive office." Darnell froze mid-step. Then the diner's landline rang again. This time it wasn't Carla who picked up. It was May, the owner, who had just arrived and heard about everything. She answered, listened, and when she hung up, her face was pale. "You two need to leave," she said firmly. "Now." "Under whose authority?" Darnell asked, but his voice was already unraveling. May stepped forward, set the phone back on its cradle. "Governor Callahan. He's on his way here." Gasps swept through the diner like wind through dry leaves. Carla stepped back. Earl stood up from his booth. The woman with the little boy clutched him tighter. No one moved toward James, but suddenly no one looked away either. Haskins muttered something under his breath and turned. Darnell followed. No words, no apology. Just shame and heavy footsteps. As they left again, this time not as officers in control, but as men who knew they had stepped far beyond their badge. James remained standing. He slowly walked toward the counter where the medal had disappeared, knelt down, and retrieved it from behind the trash can. He brushed it off gently with the sleeve of his coat and tucked it back into the wooden box. Then he sat back down and folded his hands. A long, awkward silence returned. Forks were set down, mugs untouched. Conversations died in throats. Finally, the boy, maybe 6 or 7, turned in his seat and looked at James. "Are you a hero?" he asked, loud enough for the room to hear. The mother looked horrified. "Baby, stop." But James met the boy's eyes and gave a single nod. "No," he said quietly, "but I served with some." Carla wiped her eyes. One of the truckers near the window stood up and walked out without paying. May poured herself a cup of coffee, sat on a stool near the register, and stared out the window. Nobody dared ask what would happen next, but in their silence they all knew. They had seen something that would stain the walls of that diner long after James Turner was gone. And the worst part? Not that the officers had tried to humiliate a decorated veteran, but that everyone had let them, until a single phone call reminded them who he really was. 15 minutes passed, though it felt like hours. James remained in his booth, sitting straight, his hands resting on the table like they were trained to be still. No one dared ask if he needed anything. No one dared pretend nothing had happened. And then a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot. Not just any SUV, government plates, tinted windows, 2 men in dark suits stepping out first, surveying the diner, like it was a potential threat. Then the rear door opened. Out stepped Governor Thomas Callahan. In his navy suit and polished shoes, he looked like he belonged in a marble building, not in front of a roadside diner in Leeville. His gray hair was parted neatly, but his face looked weathered, like a man carrying the weight of something unfinished. He didn't pause, didn't wave. He walked straight through the diner door. It swung open without a sound. Everyone inside stood up instinctively, except James. James only raised his eyes as the governor approached, and then, in front of that silent room, the governor opened his arms and embraced him. It wasn't a politician's hug. It wasn't stiff, rehearsed, or made for cameras. It was the embrace of someone who had been waiting to say something that words couldn't carry. "Thank you," the governor whispered. "I never got to say it. I never knew where you went." James nodded once, his eyes still clear. "You found me," he said softly. The governor turned to the stunned room. "This man," he said, "saved my son's life in Afghanistan." When the convoy was hit, everyone panicked, except for James. He shielded my boy with his body, got him out, dragged him across half a mile of burning road while wounded. My son lived. James never walked the same again. A gasp broke from someone. Near the counter, Carla's hand covered her mouth. The boy leaned forward like he was hearing a legend. The governor continued, his voice steady. "We failed him. The VA lost his paperwork. His benefits vanished. No housing, no support. He disappeared into silence, into shame, into a country that forgets its heroes once they stop wearing the uniform." James didn't flinch. He stared at the same corner of the diner he always had, like none of this was new to him, because it wasn't. "We have work to do," the governor added, turning back to James. "But that starts now, with you." He handed James a small envelope. Inside it, as would later be revealed, were contact details for full medical care, housing and legal services, quiet restitution. The governor didn't make a show of it. He nodded, placed a hand on James's shoulder, and left as silently as he came. The door swung closed behind him. The silence that followed was not the silence of shame this time. It was reverence. May finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Mr. Turner." Carla walked over and set a fresh cup of coffee on his table. "On the house," she said, voice shaking. One by one, people began to approach. An older woman placed a $10 bill on the table, said nothing, and "Pft." A young man at the counter tipped his baseball cap and whispered, "Thank you for your service." Even Earl, the retired officer who had once called James a nuisance, stood up, walked over, and offered his hand. James shook it. No smile, no bitterness, just acknowledgement. James nodded to each of them in turn, not out of pride, but because it was the way he had always carried himself, with stillness, with dignity, with no need to prove anything. He finished his coffee, stood and picked up his duffel bag. As he walked out of the diner, no one looked away. This time they stood up, quietly, respectfully, the way one rises when someone important enters a room. But James was already gone. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. Someone needs to hear it. By noon, Leeville wasn't just a sleepy town anymore. Word of what had happened at May's Diner traveled fast, faster than coffee brews or lunch orders. Someone had recorded part of the scene. Not the embrace, not the governor's voice, but the part before, The duffel bag being dumped, the medals scattered, the mockery. Within hours, the clip reached local news, then veteran forums, then social media. There was no dramatic headline, no spin, just a 3-minute video titled, "Decorated Black Veteran Harassed by Cops in South Carolina Diner." By evening, it had over 2 million views. The backlash was immediate. The Leeville Police Department issued a brief statement. "We are reviewing body cam footage and conducting an internal investigation." But that wasn't enough, because body cam footage surfaced too. Clear audio, crude jokes, laughter as medals clinked onto the floor. A Purple Heart being nudged aside like litter. The public didn't miss the silence of the other diners either. Comment sections filled with outrage, guilt, and questions. How could they treat him like that? Why didn't anyone help? Where are the consequences? They were coming. By the next morning, officers Darnell and Haskins were suspended without pay, pending investigation. But the governor's office didn't wait. A spokesperson announced the formation of a new state-level veteran advocacy initiative, named Operation Turner. Its goal: to locate and assist veterans who had fallen through bureaucratic cracks, especially homeless and disabled veterans, especially those forgotten by the very systems that once praised them. Local activists began organizing. A community rally was planned for the weekend outside Town Hall. Civil rights lawyers arrived to review past complaints about the Leeville Police Department. It turned out that Darnell and Haskins weren't new to this. They'd been written up twice before for misconduct, quietly settled, no discipline. That would not happen again. The town council, usually slow-moving and comfortable in silence, felt the heat. New policies were proposed almost overnight. Mandatory anti-bias training for law enforcement, a civilian oversight board, body cam footage to be publicly released within 72 hours of any complaint. Leeville had never seen change move this fast. Meanwhile, at May's Diner, things were different too. The booth James had always sat in remained empty the next day. A small sign rested on the table. Reserved. People came in quietly. They didn't stare at their phones. They stared at that booth. Carla started wearing her old army jacket again. Turns out she had served too, a Desert Storm. No one had ever asked. May announced a new policy. Veterans eat free, no questions asked. Then came the letter from the governor's office, handwritten, not typed, thanking May's staff for stepping in and apologizing for what should never have happened. James, meanwhile, did not return to the diner that week. But he was not forgotten. 2 blocks from the diner, a local nonprofit called Vets Forward reached out. They had been trying to help James for years. He had always refused. Said others needed it more. This time he accepted. Not because he needed pity, but because the moment had come, not just for help, but for change. He was offered a furnished 1-bedroom apartment, modest, clean, with room for his medals and books, a place to rest. He accepted on one condition: no press, no interviews, no camera crews. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to live. The apartment sat above the town's new Veteran Resource Center. James started showing up at the office twice a week, quietly, volunteering, fixing printers, making coffee, listening. Younger vets with fresh scars and older ones with forgotten names started showing up just to talk to him. He never lectured, never shared what happened at the diner unless someone asked. When they did, he just said, "Sometimes people don't see you until someone with a title says your name." The town began to shift. Slowly, but clearly. The officer's resignation. Letters came within 10 days. No public hearing, no lawsuits, just folded uniforms and 2 empty lockers. And then, something unexpected happened. A local state senator proposed a bill titled the James Act. It aimed to make it mandatory for police departments to receive quarterly veteran identification and support training. It also included protocols for handling unhoused individuals with documented military service. The bill gained support quickly, across party lines, across county lines. Because it wasn't just about one man, it was about all the others like him. Quiet, overlooked, decorated in silence, and it began with one who had been publicly humiliated and refused to return that humiliation with rage. James never returned to May's Diner that month, but every morning, Carla poured a fresh cup of coffee and placed it in his booth, just in case. No one sat there, because that seat didn't just belong to a man anymore. It belonged to a moment, a reckoning, a reminder of what happens when a country forgets its own, and what must happen next to make it right. Winter passed gently over Leeville, but the town did not forget. What had started as a moment of disgrace turned into a movement. Quiet, deliberate change had taken root, not from protests or headlines, but from a shift in how people looked at each other, how they listened, how they remembered. James Turner never stepped into the spotlight. He never spoke at rallies or sat for interviews. But the ripples of what happened to him continued spreading, long after the last news van had left. He moved into his apartment above the Veteran Resource Center. The windows faced the town square. From there, he could see the diner, the sidewalk where he had once waited for sunrise, and the place where he was nearly arrested for sitting too long with a cup of coffee he'd paid for. He went about his days, the same way he had before, quietly, deliberately. A man of habit. Twice a week he volunteered at the center downstairs. Most of the time he just listened. Younger veterans came in with fresh discharge papers and shattered nerves. Older ones came in looking for names that had vanished from government databases. James never gave long speeches, but his presence alone was enough. The way he sat, patient and calm. The way he asked, "How can I help?" instead of, "What's wrong with you?" He became the soul of the place without ever needing a title. Children from the local middle school began writing letters to veterans that were pinned up in the center's hallway. One of them read, "Dear hero, I don't know your name, but my mom says people like you made my school safe. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we forgot you." James pinned that one above his desk. The town's police department changed. Do not overnight, but step by step. The Civilian Oversight Board became permanent. Officers were required to complete veteran recognition training, and every new hire met with someone from Vets Forward during onboarding. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But the silence that had once covered injustice like dust now cracked, open at the edges. The officers who once dragged James from his booth never returned to law enforcement. Their resignations were accepted quietly. No press release, no ceremony, just absence. Carla, the diner waitress, started bringing books up to James every Sunday. Memoirs, history, poetry. He would read them slowly, sometimes returning them with pages marked and brief notes like, "This one knew the silence well." One day, a local school invited James to speak at their Veterans Day assembly. He declined. Not because he wasn't honored, but because he believed too many people spoke before they listened. Instead, he sent a letter. It was read aloud by the principal, standing behind a wooden podium in front of 300 students seated cross-legged on the gymnasium floor. The letter said, "Respect is not owed to the loudest voice. It is owed to the quiet that never gave up. We serve not to be seen, but to protect the right of others to live unseen. And sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is sit still while the world passes him by, until one moment makes it stop. I was that moment. I carry it so you don't have to. JT." The gymnasium fell into silence when it ended. The kind that meant something had been felt, even if it wasn't fully understood. Outside, winter light fell across the town. On the diner window, a new decal had been placed. "Veterans welcome always." And inside the diner, that corner booth remained untouched until the day Carla came in and found a folded newspaper resting on the table. Next to it sat a single Silver Star medal and a handwritten note. "Leave this seat for someone still waiting to be seen. Thank you for keeping the coffee warm." James, no one saw him leave that morning. His room upstairs was neat, the bed made, books stacked, duffel bag gone. He hadn't vanished, just moved forward, like he always had. And in his place, the town found something it hadn't expected. Not just guilt, Not just apology, but transformation. Young officers now paused before raising their voice. Diners now offered coffee without being asked. Children now looked at the bronze plaque on the wall of May's Diner and asked their parents what it meant. The plaque read, "This seat is reserved, in honor of Staff Sergeant James Turner. A soldier, a servant, a quiet witness, he asked for nothing and gave everything." In that small town, change didn't come with noise. It came with stillness, with dignity, with the quiet turning of hearts. Months passed, seasons shifted, but the story of James Turner remained, woven into the quiet routines of Leeville. At May's Diner, the corner booth stayed empty each morning. Not out of pity, but out of memory. New customers would ask about it. Locals would answer gently. "That's James's seat," they'd say. "He doesn't need it anymore, but we keep it ready." Above the booth hung a framed photo now, James in uniform, young and steady-eyed, the desert sun behind him. Beneath it, a small bronze plaque read, "A man of service, a man of silence." Every year now, on the first Friday of November, the town holds a veteran justice forum in the square. No big stage, no loud music, just folding chairs, warm coffee, and a single empty seat reserved in front. It's always marked, in honor of the ones who were forgotten and found again. James doesn't attend, he never has, but someone always reads his words, kept from the letter he sent to the school. This year, it was a teenager who once came into the diner with his mother. His voice cracked as he finished. "We serve not to be seen, but to protect the right of others to live unseen." The crowd stayed quiet after that, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but out of something deeper. Respect, the kind earned, not through power, but through presence. James never asked for justice. He simply lived with dignity until the world could no longer ignore it, and in doing so, he taught a town how to see again. If this story moved you, take a moment today to honor someone who walks through the world unseen. Speak up. Reach out. Remember, some heroes never wear their names on their chest, but they carry it in silence.